They thought she was just another target. A traffic stop turned tense in seconds when a decorated Army colonel, calm, composed, and unmistakably in uniform, was pulled over without cause. What started with flashing lights quickly spiraled into something darker. Handcuffs slapped on her wrists, threats whispered behind badge and uniform. The officers didn't see a soldier who had served her country. They saw only what they wanted to see. With no explanation and no respect, they tried to intimidate her, pressuring her with veiled threats and blackmail, completely unaware of who they were dealing with. But this colonel wasn't about to stay silent. She knew her rights, and more importantly, she knew powerful people. That's when she reached for her phone. One call, just one, to the Pentagon shifted the entire mood. The officers, who just moments ago acted like they were in control, suddenly panicked. Their faces changed. Their voices cracked. And for the first time, they realized just how badly they had messed up. But what exactly did she say in that call? Who answered on the other end? And why did these officers go from cocky to begging in a matter of seconds? This is more than a story of abuse of power. It's about courage, identity, and what happens when the wrong person gets treated the wrong way. You won't believe what happens next. The story didn't start with sirens. It started earlier that morning. Colonel Daniels, a highly respected officer with over 2 decades of service, was on her way to a veterans event. She wore her uniform with pride, medals shining on her chest, her ID badge clearly displayed. She had given her life to serve and protect a country that, in that moment, didn't seem to see her the same way. Driving through a quiet suburban neighborhood, she noticed the patrol car trailing her. She didn't think much of it until it flashed its lights. She pulled over calmly, expecting a routine check. But the moment the officer approached, his tone was sharp, almost confrontational. He didn't ask for her license. He didn't acknowledge her uniform. Instead, he asked her to step out of the vehicle. When she asked for a reason, things escalated fast. The second officer arrived. Within minutes, she was being restrained, her questions ignored. One officer leaned in close, whispering something about making things disappear if she just cooperated. That's when it became clear. This wasn't about the law. This was personal. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. They saw a woman they thought they could intimidate. They didn't see the Pentagon clearance, the direct contacts in Washington, and they definitely didn't expect what came next. As Colonel Daniels stood on the side of the road, handcuffed and humiliated, she kept her composure. Years of military discipline had taught her that staying calm was her greatest weapon. But inside, she was boiling. This wasn't just a bad stop. This was a violation of everything she stood for. The officers still hadn't explained why they pulled her over. They were more focused on control than conversation. One officer kept glancing at her ID badge, but said nothing. The other paced back and forth, pretending to radio in false information. Meanwhile, a small crowd began to form, neighbors peeking from behind curtains, a jogger slowing down, confused by the sight of a high-ranking officer being treated like a criminal. The whispers started. People began recording, but the officers didn't stop. Colonel Daniels had seen injustice overseas, but she never thought she'd face this kind of racial profiling in her own country. She knew this wasn't just about her, it was bigger. How many others had been silenced in moments like this? At that point, she made the call. Her voice didn't shake. She didn't raise it. She calmly stated her name, location, and badge number to the person on the other end. The mood shifted instantly. One officer stepped back. The other froze. They started whispering to each other, their faces pale. Something had changed, but she wasn't finished yet. The silence after that phone call was louder than the sirens. Colonel Daniels stood tall, still in handcuffs, as the officer who had barked orders now avoided eye contact. The other one, the one who had hinted at letting this go quietly, started fidgeting, his hands shaking just enough for her to notice. They both knew something was coming. They just didn't know how fast or how high up it would go. Within minutes, a black SUV pulled up, unmarked but unmistakably federal. Two men in suits stepped out, flashing credentials too quickly for the growing crowd to catch. One of them walked straight toward the colonel. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, loud enough for the officers to hear. The question wasn't just about safety, it was a statement, a warning. The officers stepped back, trying to explain themselves, but their words came out scrambled. Excuses turned into stammers. The one who had cuffed her suddenly seemed unsure of how to unlock the restraints. His voice, once filled with authority, now cracked as he tried to say it was all standard procedure. But Colonel Daniels didn't flinch. She didn't answer their sudden apologies. Her eyes stayed on the man in the suit, waiting for the next move. Because now it wasn't just about her, it was about accountability. And that moment, that next breath, was about to change everything. Just when it seemed like the situation had flipped in Colonel Daniels' favor, something unexpected happened. One of the suited agents leaned in and quietly handed her a phone. "There's someone who wants to speak with you," he said, his voice low. She took it without hesitation. On the other end was a familiar voice, stern, calm, and powerful. It was her commanding officer from the Pentagon, but instead of comfort, the call brought a warning. "There's more going on here than you think," he said. These officers weren't acting alone. That's when it hit her. This wasn't just a case of random police misconduct. It was deeper, organized, targeted. Her recent work in military intelligence had stirred up powerful enemies, both inside and outside the system. The traffic stop wasn't just about race or power. It may have been part of something far more calculated. Back at the scene, one of the officers received a text and quickly turned pale. He glanced at the agent, then at the colonel, like he had just realized he was a pawn in a much bigger game. Colonel Daniels noticed the shift immediately. The tension tightened again. The officers weren't just afraid of consequences anymore, they were afraid of exposure. Now, it wasn't just about justice, it was about survival, and the real danger hadn't even arrived yet. Colonel Daniels handed the phone back, her face unreadable. The agents exchanged a look. Then one of them turned to the officers and quietly said, "You need to come with us." No sirens, no cuffs, just quiet authority. The officers didn't argue. They knew whatever came next was above their heads, way above. As they were led away, a third vehicle rolled up, this time clearly marked with federal insignia. A woman stepped out, someone Daniels recognized from a classified briefing months ago. She wasn't law enforcement. She was internal security, the kind that shows up when something's gone very wrong inside the system. The woman approached the colonel and said, "We've been watching them. You just helped us confirm what we couldn't." It turned out the officers weren't just acting on their own. They were part of a wider network, linked to illegal surveillance, targeting whistleblowers and high-ranking military personnel. Colonel Daniels had unknowingly stepped into a trap that wasn't meant for her directly, but her identity and access made her the perfect target. The conflict seemed resolved. The officers were taken, the truth was out, but just as Daniels exhaled, her phone buzzed. One message, unknown number. It read, "Asterisk, you were never supposed to make that call, asterisk." She stared at the screen, her grip tightening. The story wasn't over, it was just beginning. Colonel Daniels stared at the message, her mind racing. But instead of fear, she felt clarity. She had spent her career standing up to threats, foreign and domestic, and this was no different. The message was meant to scare her into silence, but all it did was confirm that the people behind this was still out there watching. In the days that followed, an internal investigation was launched. The two officers were suspended and later indicted after evidence of the legal activities surfaced. Hidden body cam footage, falsified reports, and connections to a deeper web of corruption were uncovered. Daniels' decision to make that call didn't just protect herself, it cracked open a case the government had been quietly chasing for months. She returned to duty with a quiet sense of purpose, more aware than ever that the uniform she wore came with more than responsibility. It came with eyes constantly watching. But she also knew her strength wasn't just in her rank or her clearance, it was in her voice. And while she never found out exactly who sent that message, she made one thing clear: silence would never be an option, because sometimes the most powerful weapon is the truth.